You're listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast, where I give you insight, awareness, and enlightenment about your parenting and your relationship with your kids. In today's episode, I would like to present a new term, or a phrase, if you will, to help us better understand why it is difficult to relate to our kids sometimes. And not relate to them relationally necessarily, not relate to them in some familial kind of way, but to really understand what's going on for them and why they do and say the things that they do and say. There's often a disconnect. And so many times parents get frustrated that, quote, I talk to my kid and nothing happens. I ask my kid questions and I get one-word answers. My kid just does the most random things and there's absolutely no explanation for it. If those phrases sound familiar or you say them on a semi-frequent basis, the phrase that we've come up with to describe this is adulthood bias. And I want to dive into that a little bit today because I think this will shed a lot of light and give a lot of perspective on why sometimes things just don't make sense to us. And that we often look at what goes on in a normal everyday scenario with our children, and it's just confusing and annoying what goes on, but that's driven by our adulthood bias. So here's what we know. Let's go back to early podcast episodes. We know that kids aren't rational. We have talked about that a lot. When we grasp that concept, that should influence a lot of our interactions. But because of adulthood bias, we often forget that we are cognitive, we are rational, we have abstract reasoning, we are processing things intellectually, and they are not. They are here and now, emotionally driven, experiential beings. So this is where adulthood bias gets in the way. Because your kid gets really angry and kicks the wall and leaves a hole in the drywall. Why in the world would you do that? What were you thinking? Why? You know better. What is going on? Those are all very rational, intellectual, reason-based questions. And here's the truth. If the child were thinking or reasoning or rationalizing anything, they wouldn't have kicked the wall and left a hole in it. But they weren't. See, here's the interesting dynamic that we tend to forget. We were kids once. We know that we were once childlike. We once experienced childhood just like our children do. And we were exactly like them. But we have forgotten what that's like. Because we now possess the capacity to reason. We now possess the capacity to be rational. So therefore, look, if we get back to our innate instincts, we want to kick something sometimes too. We want to put our fists through drywall sometimes too. We want to throw something sometimes too. And you know what? Let's be really real. A lot of adults still do. So this is not something that we just automatically escape as soon as we become an adult. Some adults still react that way. Their emotions still drive everything they do, and they don't have abstract reasoning get involved at all. So there are adults that very much behave in those ways. But if our abstract reasoning overrides our desire to just emotionally express how we're feeling, we have totally forgotten that kids live there all the time. So when a child kicks the wall and puts a hole through it, or throws the Hot Wheels and it leaves a dent somewhere, or they push their sibling and their sibling falls over and cuts their knee, or whatever the scenario is, we forget that they didn't think about any of those decisions. They acted on emotional impulse. I'm angry, I push. I'm frustrated, I throw. I'm upset, I kick. It is 100% experienced emotion. feeling driven, no brain engagement whatsoever. Developmentally appropriately, we cannot fault them for that. We cannot expect it of them. Until around 12 or 13, they're not able to do it. So, adulthood bias is something we need to keep in check. Because while we were kids once, we've forgotten, but we do possess the capacity to go back and meet kids and their emotions. Kids do not possess the ability to come up and meet us in our thought. So this is a one-way street here. We have to go down to them. And adulthood bias is what keeps us from doing it, because we treat them like small adults. Actually, I have an online community for child-centered play therapists, and we were posting about this, kind of a related topic, in these last couple weeks. And my husband acknowledged that Dr. Phil was the one who kind of coined the phrase, "You're not raising children, you're raising mini adults." That is the most uninformed sentence that has ever come out of a psychologist's mouth, in my opinion. And I'm not saying that to be critical of Dr. Phil. He works with adults, and so, maybe he doesn't really fully understand childhood and age-appropriate behavior. We're not raising mini adults. They're not adults. They're children. Until the age of 18, they are still in their childhood years. And until the age of 12 or 13, they don't even possess the cognitive development to even get halfway to thinking like an adult. So we are not raising mini adults. We are raising children. And children are emotional. And children experience things and they feel things. And their brain is shut off. And we can't expect them to change that. They're not able to change it. So every time we ask a child a question and get "I don't know" or a one-word answer, that's a reminder of our adulthood bias. Every time we watch our child do something that's completely irrational, completely impulsive, completely crazy, completely confusing, that's our adulthood bias kicking in. If we could remember what it's like to be a kid, kids just do things because they feel like they want to do them. They have no ability to say, well, you want to jump into that recycling bin and strap it to a skateboard and have someone pull you on a bike down the road, but that's probably not a good idea because you're going to fall out and get hurt. We forget that they don't even have the ability to do that. By the way, that's a true story from my childhood. I don't even know why I'm sharing this, but so my brother, 3 years younger than I am, I don't even remember if it was bungee corded or duct taped, or I don't even know how it was affixed, but we had our plastic recycling bin, big rectangular box of sorts that is attached in some way, shape, or form to his skateboard. He has me sit in the recycling bin attached to the skateboard, holding a rope, and he has the rope tied to the back of his bike, and he takes off down the road and is going as fast as he can on said bike to pull me down the street. And he had loosened the trucks. Now, for those of you that are not skaters, the trucks are the wheels and metal supports on the bottom of the skateboard. He had loosened them so he could do better tricks. Well, what happens when you go really fast and you have loose trucks? Everything starts to wobble like an earthquake. And so I am wobbling like an earthquake, rolling down the street at way too fast of speeds, and the whole thing tipped and I fell. And I still, to this day, have a mushroom-shaped scar on the side of my right knee because of a recycling bin and a skateboard and a bike with my brother, who was probably, 7 at the time, and had no abstract reasoning and had no rational thought and was not cognitive at all and was like, this should be fun. And I, who at 10 years old also did not possess any of those abilities, was like, sure, why not? And here we are, all these years later, and I still have a mushroom-shaped scar. The point is, kids do not think, and we can't expect them to. And the irony is, we are constantly thinking about their behavior. And we're constantly frustrated by their behavior because we want them to behave differently. There are times when we need to set limits. There are times when we need to reflect feelings. There are times when we need to provide choices. Those are all age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate interactions. And we don't mean to, but often our conversations and the way that we approach things, because of our adulthood bias, it actually is dismissive to kids. It actually makes them feel like they shouldn't feel the way they do. And they very much should feel that way because they're feeling beings. Their feelings are huge. Their feelings drive everything that they do. So when we go, that's not a reason to cry. Why are you upset about that right now? This is not a big deal. That's dismissive to a child, and that's our adulthood bias getting in the way. It is a very big deal, and it feels very big and deep to them. But our rational brain goes, okay, you can't play with your friend today. It's going to be fine. But it doesn't feel fine to them. So I'm hopeful that this will help you understand how to better relate, better understand, better preserve the relationship. Because if we recognize our own adulthood bias and we're able to respond differently as a result, it will help our communication. It will help children feel heard and understood. It will allow us to provide play therapy-based interventions. So if necessary, we'll set a limit. We'll follow the 3-step limit setting process. We always need to validate our children's feelings. We can provide choices for empowerment or for enforcement. There's all of these skills that we talk about all the time that are the antidote to the adulthood bias. Because if we operate in our adulthood bias, we're going to get angry, frustrated, disappointed. We're going to ask questions. We're going to lecture. We're going to overtalk. We're going to over-rationalize. We're going to have 10-minute conversations with kids when they checked out after the first 10 words. All of that is driven by adulthood bias. So if we can grasp this in conjunction with kids aren't rational, do you see how these two go together? Kids aren't rational and we have adulthood bias. You fuse those two things together, it will change every interaction that you have with your children for the better. So I hope that encourages you. I hope that enables you to feel like there's a why behind some of the things that go on with our kids, because kids' behavior can be confusing sometimes. So this is a why. We don't see it the way they see it because of our adulthood bias. I hope that helps you and makes you feel supported and encouraged. If you would like to reach out to me to say hello, to send me a question, to ask me something that's going on, I'd love to hear from you, Brenna@thekidcounselor.com. Thanks so much for hanging out with me each week. I don't take it lightly that you give me some of your time each week and that we are on this raising children journey together. So thanks so much. I really appreciate y'all. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and to subscribe to our newsletter, please go to www.playtherapyparenting.com.